We see a number of really important economic trends that have occurred certainly over the last sort of 6 to 12 months that are really kind of driving renewed interest in enterprise mobility in particular. We've gradually tiptoed out of a recession going back to, say, 2008, and what we've seen, and we do a lot of surveys on purchasing trends from IT departments in terms of their mobile workforces. And we've seen a renewed interest in kind of growth opportunities, in particular focusing on the customer. So things like improving customer service, things like enabling the sales force to spend a bit more time with customers, things like having even more holistically across the workforce a more adaptive, a more flexible workforce to enable a response to rapidly competitive and changing economic requirements on behalf of customers as well. So these are big trends and big changes at a macro level that are driving specific interest in things like field service solutions, in things like Salesforce automation. What's really interesting actually over the last sort of 4 to 6 months is a renewed focus from other functions within enterprises such as marketing and looking at ways in which they can leverage kind of off the back of what is a phenomenal growth in consumer adoption of mobile technology. So things like extending the brand, engaging in loyalty programs, traditional e-commerce budgets and web commerce budgets are now moving more and more to mobile, which is a new trend, and we're going to see more of that in the future. There are a number of opportunities and threats for organizations as enterprises increasingly and consumers increasingly mobilize. The opportunities are increasingly opening up, and whether they're in terms of transforming business processes, enabling and optimizing existing processes within a business, whether it's from a marketing perspective where organizations actually want to use mobile for the first time to really build the brand and engage customers on a new level, or whether it's just to better engage the customer, whether it's enabling the sales force or the service organization more effectively. So these opportunities, I think, are becoming more and more increasing the awareness within the CIO environment. But at the same time, we're starting to see a lot more threats opening up around increased mobilization, particularly in terms of managing and securing company data and applications on an array of different device types and endpoints today. And that, of course, is a technology challenge and a security challenge as well for organizations. But more importantly, actually, it's a policy, compliance, and business strategy challenge that many CIOs today are still working through. I think over the next 6 to 12 months, this is actually aligning with some bigger decisions that organizations face around, say, for example, cloud computing and virtualization technologies as well, that will really propel a kind of much more holistic and strategic thinking an approach to mobility, which will enable organizations more effectively to distribute policy and control this environment more effectively over the next 6 to 12 months. The smartphone and ruggedized device debate will continue. There's absolutely no question about that. I think one thing has become certain, certainly over the last 12 months, is that I think going back 2 years ago, there was quite a lot of discussion in the industry on whether smartphones would actually, in fact, cannibalize ruggedized devices due to the popularity of those device platforms. And we haven't seen that, certainly haven't seen that yet. IDC predict healthy growth, anywhere between sort of 7 and 10% growth worldwide in the ruggedized device space, certainly over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. But one thing is, I think, certain is that we will see increasing overlap and synergies adopted across both environments, which will, I think, be healthy for the industry as a whole, but ultimately for users as well, whom are increasingly wanting some of that crossover functionality to appeal to both their business life and their private life as well. So the smartphone space and the ruggedized space, really, these two environments, the barriers between them, which have traditionally been in place going back 3 or 4 years, are increasingly coming down. And we're starting to see more and more, if you like, synergies across both environments today. You have to look at the smartphone environment and how technologies such as, traditionally even ruggedized technologies such as barcode scanning is now emerging in smartphones. Increasingly going forward, we're going to have point-of-sale opportunities around near-field communications. And these features and functions have traditionally been associated predominantly historically with ruggedized devices. But it's really in the ruggedized device environment where we've seen, I think, an increasing change of thinking around the form factor. In particular, things like smaller designs, more, if you like, portable devices, increasing use of touch interfaces, QWERTY keyboards. These sort of things, which have typically been associated in smartphones, are now starting to more and more become the focus in the ruggedized device environment. But I think most importantly, from a ruggedized device perspective, is we're starting to see more and more focus around the user, and particularly the user interface and the user experience around the device. What we've seen, interestingly, is a renewed interest on behalf of ruggedized device manufacturers in looking at ways in which they can incorporate a lot of the, if you like, the personal experiences that users have in their private lives around the consumer smartphone environment into the ruggedized devices themselves. And what we've seen in particular is that in the traditional environments and around a lot of the traditional devices, there's effectively a gap in terms of that user experience, which I think invariably will need to be bridged. And we've only just started to see the impact of things like iPads and iPhone emerge into the ruggedized space, certainly over the last 6 to 12 months. And I think we're going to see more and more of that going forward. So there's going to be increasingly more and more overlap between these two environments in the future. There are a number of key criteria that CIOs look for when choosing devices for their field engineers. I think first and foremost, obviously, cost is king. And the business case really drives the major decisions in this process. But it's not obviously just the cost of the hardware or the device itself. It's the total cost of ownership across the lifeline or life cycle of that particular endpoint. And of course, that debate itself ranges across a number of different criteria, depending on the particular user preference, depending on the organization's priorities, and of course the IT priorities of that organization as well. But those really are the main priorities. But I think what we've also seen increasingly over the last 12 months is a real strong focus on the user experience and getting user buy-in of the device itself early on in the process. This is largely due to the effect of consumerization. A lot of these users have these consumer devices in their private lives, and that user experience they're used to a certain level. And making sure that there is in fact not a massive gulf between what they are used to in their private lives and what they're used to in their enterprise lives is absolutely becoming more and more of a focus for CIOs. If that gap is obviously quite wide, it undermines user buy-in early on. So I think, of course, the TCO issue is first and foremost, but we're starting to see more and more focus on the user experience as well in terms of ruggedized device selection. Perhaps one of the biggest trends that we see today is the much discussed consumerization of IT trend that Mr. Jobs, in fact, from Apple called the megatrend in IT this year. I think unanimously across the board, and IDC engaged with CIOs across the business globally, and we've certainly engaged with them a lot on this issue over the last 6 to 12 months. This is a big issue for many CIOs today. Of course, the tsunami of devices that are really confronting many CIOs today have created slightly a change in thinking in terms of their approach to this particular trend. Perhaps 12 to 18 months ago, there was a question of stopping it. There was a questioning, to an extent, even of ignoring it. But now, I think almost unanimously, many CIOs are looking at ways in which it can be managed and actually exploited for the benefit of the good of the business. And this, of course, is a technology challenge on one hand. So how do you manage these devices? How do you secure company data and applications on these devices on one hand? But more importantly, I think for many CIOs today, it's much more of a strategy, compliance, and policy challenge that I think many CIOs today are grappling with. But I think one thing is clear, that saying no or ignoring it is a risk. One of the greatest quotes I've heard recently from a CIO who said that the more the CIO says no to mobility, the less secure the organization becomes. And those CIOs that do say no to mobility, in fact, are standing in the way of history. So it's quite a grand quote itself, but I think it illustrates that those that aren't looking at this proactively, there are some risks associated, but it also illustrates the change in thinking that is occurring, not only in terms of embracing consumerization, but also looking at ways in which it can be managed and controlled effectively for the business. Machine-to-machine technology, we've really seen a ramp up in growth in the market, certainly over the last 12 months. We predict anywhere between 10 to 15% revenue growth for machine to machine over the next 5 years across Europe. So there is some strong opportunities in this market. We do see it really opening up today, driven by a number of factors. But I think it's important to note that the concept of machine to machine in environments such as the supply chain, environments such as field force automation, or in fleet management actually isn't that new. But what is new is the notion of scalability of machine to machine. We've seen quite strong investment on behalf of the mobile operators and the telco community in building these international connectivity platforms, which really help businesses scale in terms of shipping and managing and tracking assets cross-border, which, for example, in the industrial machinery environment is really, really taking off at this stage. Also, what we're seeing is, to an extent, the mass market opportunity for machine to machine opening up as well, particularly in verticals such as the energy and utilities environment, such as smart metering, the automotive and telematics environment. And these two particular verticals are driven heavily by regulation, which are really supporting the adoption of machine-to-machine technologies. And I think as a third layer of opportunity, we're starting to see more and more interest in the healthcare environment in terms of remote patient monitoring, etc. So all these are combining, particularly in the enterprise context, to really drive momentum into machine-to-machine. So we'll see more and more of this over the next 12 to 24 months. The Enterprise Mobility Exchange looks great in terms of the networking opportunities, in terms of the profile of the users and of course the service provider community and vendor community that are going to be there. I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of best practice in terms of deploying mobility across a range of different sectors and enterprises as well. I think, yes, I want to hear a lot about technology, but I also want to hear about policy, strategy, governance. I want to hear unique angles on deploying mobility across multiple user groups within an organization. And I think the exchange will really kind of hone in on that. The service lines, but also other areas within the enterprise environment as well. And that really is a big plus for me in terms of attending. So I look forward to it.